The blood-red sun beat down mercilessly on Vanessa Lawson's shoulders as she trudged along the dusty road leading to Watsonville, Colorado. It was 1875, and the promise of a fresh start had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Her once beautiful face, now marred with exhaustion and fear, told the story of a woman who had gambled everything on the wrong man. The letter in her pocket promising work as a schoolteacher in this frontier town felt like a cruel joke now that she had discovered the truth about her employer. Vanessa adjusted the small bundle of belongings slung over her shoulder, wincing as the movement aggravated the bruises hidden beneath her worn calico dress. 2 months of working for Silas Thornton at his respectable establishment had taught her that nothing about the man or his saloon was respectable. She had arrived expecting to teach children. Instead, she found herself serving drinks to rough men with wandering hands and expectations that made her stomach turn. "You ain't gonna make it far, girl," Silas had sneered when she announced her intention to leave that morning. "Nobody leaves the silver dollar without my say-so." But she had left anyway, slipping out at dawn while Silas snored in his whiskey-soaked stupor. Now, with the town of Watsonville visible in the distance, Vanessa's determination wavered. Where would she go? What would she do? At 23, she had no family, no money, and no protection in this harsh land. The sound of hoofbeats made her heart lurch. She stepped to the side of the road, keeping her head down as a rider approached from the direction of town. Just as the horse drew near, she heard more hoofbeats from behind, faster, more urgent. "There she is." Silas's voice cut through the quiet afternoon like a knife. "Grab her, Walt." Vanessa broke into a run, her lungs burning as she tried to escape. The rider ahead pulled his horse to a stop, and through her panicked haze she saw a tall man dismount. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but there was something steady in his stance as he assessed the situation. "Help me," she gasped as she neared him. "Please." Behind her, the thunder of hooves grew closer. Silas and his right-hand man, Walt, were bearing down on her, dust billowing behind their horses. Walt's arm was raised, the long leather whip coiled like a snake, ready to strike. "You'll learn what happens to thieves, Vanessa," Silas bellowed. The accusation was a lie. She had taken nothing but what was rightfully hers. Walt's whip cracked in the air, a threat of what was to come. Vanessa stumbled, throwing her hands up in a futile attempt to shield herself. But the blow never landed. The stranger stepped between her and the whip, catching the leather in his gloved hand. With one smooth motion, he yanked it from Walt's grip, causing the man to nearly topple from his horse. "Your days of pain are done, madam," the cowboy said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. He turned to face Silas and Walt, positioning himself protectively in front of Vanessa. "This ain't your business, Garrett," Silas spat, recognizing the man. "That woman stole from me." "I didn't steal anything," Vanessa protested, finding her voice. "He lied about the teaching position. He wanted me to work in his saloon in other ways." Garrett Blackwell's jaw tightened as he took in her disheveled appearance and the fear in her eyes. "Seems to me the lady is leaving your employment, Thornton. That's her right." "Nobody leaves without paying what they owe me," Silas snarled. "I paid her stage fare from Denver. She owes me." "How much?" Garrett asked. $20, Silas replied too quickly. Garrett reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins, counting them deliberately. "Here's 25. Consider her debt paid with interest." He tossed the money into the dust at Silas's feet. The saloon owner's face contorted with rage, but something in Garrett's stance, or perhaps the way his coat fell open to reveal the gleaming Colt at his hip, made Silas reconsider his options. "Fine," Silas muttered, dismounting to collect the money. "She ain't worth the trouble anyway." He jerked his head at Walt. "Let's go." Vanessa watched them ride away, hardly daring to believe her ordeal might be over. When they disappeared around a bend in the road, her knees nearly buckled with relief. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at her rescuer for the first time. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but his eyes were a startling blue that reminded her of the Colorado sky. He wasn't young, perhaps in his early 30s, but there was a vitality about him that spoke of strength and purpose. "Garrett Blackwell," he said, extending his hand. "I ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Vanessa Lawson," she replied, her hand disappearing in his much larger one. I don't know how I'll repay you." "No need," he said, retrieving his horse's reins. "Where were you headed?" "Nowhere," she admitted, the truth of her situation hitting her anew. "I thought I had a teaching position here, but that was just Silas's trick to get me to Watsonville." Garrett studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "As it happens, the town is in need of a teacher. The last one left 2 months ago to get married. The schoolhouse has been empty since." Hope flared in Vanessa's chest. "Really? Is there someone I should speak with about the position?" "Mayor Jenkins handles school matters," Garrett said. "I was headed into town. I can introduce you if you'd like." "I would be most grateful," Vanessa said, trying to smooth her travel-wrinkled dress. Garrett led his horse over to her. "Can you ride?" "It's been some time, but yes." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The solid warmth of him at her back was both reassuring and disconcerting. Vanessa couldn't remember the last time she had been this close to a man without feeling threatened. They rode in silence for a while, the gentle rhythm of the horses' hooves stirring up little puffs of dust from the road. "Have you been in Watsonville long?" Vanessa finally asked. 7 years, Garrett replied. "Came west after the war looking for a fresh start." "The war between the states?" she asked, though she should have known from his age. "Yes, madam, fought for the Union." "My father did as well," Vanessa said softly. "He never came home." Garrett's arm tightened slightly around her waist, an involuntary gesture of sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that." As they approached Watsonville, Vanessa took in the frontier town with new eyes. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, some freshly painted, others weathered gray with age. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and nearby stood a modest schoolhouse. "It's not much," Garrett said, following her gaze, "but it's home to good people, mostly." "It looks peaceful," Vanessa said, and meant it. After the chaos of her recent experiences, peace was exactly what she craved. Garrett guided his horse to the hitching post outside a building marked Town Hall. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Vanessa down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, and for a brief moment, she found herself looking directly into his eyes. "Thank you," she said again, unsure if she was thanking him for the ride or for something more, the possibility of a new beginning, perhaps. "Let's see about that teaching position," he replied with a small smile that transformed his serious face. The mayor, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and an expansive manner, was delighted to meet Vanessa. "A teacher, you say, from back east? Why, this is providential. The children have been running wild for months." "I was trained at the normal school in Boston," Vanessa explained, "and I taught for 2 years in Denver before coming here." "Excellent, excellent," Mayor Jenkins beamed. "When can you start?" The speed of it all left Vanessa momentarily speechless. As soon as possible, I suppose. But I'll need to find lodging, and Mrs. Hollister takes in boarders," the mayor said. "Respectable widow, keeps a clean house. I'm sure she'd be pleased to have a teacher under her roof." "The pay is $30 a month," he continued, "and the town provides basic supplies. The schoolhouse needs a good cleaning, but some of the mothers would likely help with that." It was more than Vanessa had dared to hope for. That would be wonderful, Mr. Jenkins. I accept with gratitude. Splendid. The mayor pumped her hand vigorously. Garrett, would you be so kind as to show Miss Lawson to Mrs. Hollister's? I'd do it myself, but I have the council meeting in 10 minutes. Of course, Garrett replied. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Vanessa felt slightly dazed by the swift turn of events. Is it always this easy to find employment in Watsonville? Garrett chuckled, a warm sound that eased some of the tension from her shoulders. Only if you're qualified for something the town desperately needs. Jenkins wasn't exaggerating. Those children have been a handful since Miss Peterson left. As they walked, leading Garrett's horse, Vanessa became uncomfortably aware of her appearance. I must look a fright, she murmured, trying to tuck escaped tendrils of hair back into her once neat bun. You look like someone who's had a difficult journey, Garrett said kindly. Mrs. Hollister won't mind. She's a good woman. Mrs. Hollister proved to be exactly as described, a plump, cheerful widow of about 50 who welcomed Vanessa with genuine warmth. A teacher. What a blessing, she exclaimed after introductions were made. The second bedroom upstairs is yours if you want it. $5 a week includes meals and laundry. That's very fair, Vanessa said, mentally calculating how long her meager savings would last until she received her first month's pay. Seeing her hesitation, Mrs. Hollister added, "First week in advance, the rest can wait until your school salary comes in. I know how it is starting fresh." Thank you, Vanessa said, touched by the unexpected kindness. I'll leave you ladies to get settled, Garrett said, tipping his hat. Miss Lawson, if you need anything, most folks in town know how to find me. Watching him stride away, Vanessa felt a curious mixture of gratitude and regret. She owed this man so much, yet knew so little about him. Garrett Blackwell is one of the good ones, Mrs. Hollister remarked, following Vanessa's gaze. Keeps to himself mostly, but always there when someone needs help. He certainly helped me today, Vanessa said softly. Mrs. Hollister showed Vanessa to a small but clean bedroom with a view of the distant mountains. Bathrooms down the hall we share. Dinner's at 6, but I can bring something up if you'd prefer to rest. No, I'll join you, Vanessa said. I've been alone too much lately. Left to herself, Vanessa sank onto the bed, finally allowing the events of the day to wash over her. She had escaped Sela's, found employment and lodging, and met a man who had treated her with respect and kindness, all things that had seemed impossible mere hours ago. Her hands trembled as she unpacked her few possessions. Among them was her mother's locket, the only valuable thing she owned. Inside were tiny portraits of her parents, painted before the war took her father away. Vanessa clasped it around her neck, drawing comfort from the familiar weight against her skin. I'm going to be all right, she whispered to herself. This time, I'm going to be all right. The next morning, Vanessa rose early, eager to see her new workplace. Mrs. Hollister provided a hearty breakfast and directions to the schoolhouse, which stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with a small bell tower. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. The room contained rows of wooden desks, a larger desk at the front for the teacher, a blackboard, and bookshelves that held a modest collection of texts. It needed cleaning and organizing, but Vanessa could already envision it filled with students. She was sweeping the floor when a voice from the doorway startled her. Thought you might need some help. Garrett stood there, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncertain. Mr. Blackwell, Vanessa smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose further. No imposition. Mayor Jenkins mentioned you'd be starting classes next Monday. That doesn't give you much time to get ready. He was right. 5 days to clean the schoolhouse, prepare lessons, and meet the families whose children she would be teaching seemed barely sufficient. "Thank you," she said. "I would appreciate the help." They worked together through the morning, Garrett tackling the heavier tasks, fixing a loose floorboard, repairing a broken window, and hauling in fresh water from the pump outside. Vanessa cleaned, organized books, and made lists of supplies she would need. "How many students will I have?" she asked as they paused for a lunch of bread, cheese, and apples that Garrett had brought. "About 20, I'd guess. Ages 6 to 14, all levels of learning." "That's manageable," Vanessa said, thinking of her class in Denver that had numbered nearly 40. "Some of the ranch children might not come every day, especially during busy seasons," Garrett added. "And a few of the older boys," he hesitated, "might not see the value in education." Vanessa finished with a knowing smile. Garrett nodded. "Their fathers want extra hands on the ranch. Hard to argue with that when survival depends on it." "I understand," Vanessa said. "But perhaps if I can show them that education has practical applications for ranching, mathematics for managing herds and finances, science for animal husbandry, reading for contracts and market reports." "You've given this some thought," Garrett observed. "Teaching is my calling," she said simply. "I want to help these children build better lives, whatever path they choose." Garrett studied her with those intense blue eyes. "You're not what I expected." "Oh, and what did you expect, Mr. Blackwell? Someone more fragile, I suppose." "After what happened yesterday," Vanessa set down her apple core. "Yesterday I was terrified. Today I'm determined. Both can be true at once." A slow smile spread across Garrett's face. "I reckon they can." By mid-afternoon, the schoolhouse had been transformed. Sunlight sparkled through clean windows onto freshly swept floors. The desks were arranged in neat rows, and the blackboard gleamed with a new coat of slate paint Garrett had procured from the general store. "It's wonderful," Vanessa said, surveying their work. "I can hardly believe we accomplished so much in one day." "You did most of it," Garrett insisted. "I just handled the heavy lifting." "Nevertheless, I'm grateful." Vanessa hesitated, then added, Would you tell me more about Watsonville?" "About the families whose children I'll be teaching." Garrett glanced at the westering sun. "I should get back to my ranch, but perhaps I could call on you tomorrow evening, give you a proper introduction to the town." "I would like that," Vanessa said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. After Garrett left, Vanessa remained at the schoolhouse, working on lesson plans until the light began to fade. Walking back to Mrs. Hollister's, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in months. The town was coming alive with evening activities. The saloon at the far end of the street was already noisy. But elsewhere, families were gathering for dinner. Shopkeepers were closing up, and neighbors were exchanging greetings on porches. This could be home, Vanessa thought. A real home, not just a place to survive. At dinner, Mrs. Hollister introduced Vanessa to her other boarder, Dr. Elijah Parker, a quiet man in his 50s who served as the town's only physician. "How do you find Watsonville so far, Miss Lawson?" he asked. "Everyone has been remarkably welcoming," Vanessa replied truthfully. "I've only been here a day, but I already feel less like a stranger." "That's the way of small towns," Dr. Parker said. "For better or worse, everyone becomes involved in everyone else's business quite quickly." "Speaking of which," Mrs. Hollister interjected, "I noticed Garrett Blackwell helped you at the schoolhouse today." There was a hint of something in her tone that made Vanessa's cheeks warm. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell was kind enough to assist with some repairs." "Garrett is a good man, Doctor," Parker remarked. "Keeps to himself mostly, but always ready to lend a hand when needed." "I gathered as much," Vanessa said. "He certainly came to my aid yesterday." "Oh," Mrs. Hollister's curiosity was piqued. Vanessa hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about her encounter with Silas Thornton. "I had a disagreement with someone on the road into town," Mr. Blackwell intervened. "That sounds like Garrett," Dr. Parker nodded. "He has a strong sense of justice. Ever since he came here after the war, he's been the sort of man people turn to when there's trouble." "Has he lived in Watsonville long?" Vanessa asked, trying to sound merely conversational. 7 years or so," Mrs. Hollister replied. "Bought that ranch outside town when it was little more than a shack and a few scrubby acres. Built it up into something fine through sheer determination." "Does he have family?" The question slipped out before Vanessa could stop it. Mrs. Hollister's eyes twinkled knowingly. "No wife, if that's what you're asking. No children either. Lost his parents before the war, from what I understand." "I see," Vanessa murmured, embarrassed by her transparency. "It's natural to be curious about your benefactor," Dr. Parker said kindly, "especially one as noteworthy as Mr. Blackwell." The conversation moved on to other topics: the town's history, the upcoming harvest festival, and Mrs. Hollister's plans to expand her vegetable garden. Throughout the evening, Vanessa found herself drawing comparisons between the warmth of this impromptu family dinner and the cold, hungry nights she had spent at Silas's saloon. Later, as she prepared for bed, Vanessa reflected on the dramatic changes in her circumstances. From desperation to hope in the span of 36 hours, all because a stranger had stepped between her and a whip, offering protection when she most needed it. The following day was filled with preparations for school. Vanessa visited the general store, where the owner, Mr. Henderson, was delighted to extend credit to the new teacher for classroom supplies. Several mothers brought their children to meet her, and Vanessa took the opportunity to learn about each potential student's abilities and interests. By late afternoon, she felt both exhausted and exhilarated. Returning to Mrs. Hollister's to freshen up before Garrett's visit, she caught herself humming something she hadn't done in months. "You look happier today, Mrs. Hollister observed as Vanessa came downstairs in her one good dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. "I am," Vanessa admitted. "It feels good to be working again, doing something meaningful." "And perhaps your improved spirits have something to do with your expected visitor," Mrs. Hollister suggested with a smile. "Mr. Blackwell has been very kind," Vanessa said carefully. "I appreciate his willingness to acquaint me with the town." "Of course, Mrs. Hollister nodded, her expression innocent but her eyes knowing. "Just an orientation for the new teacher." Garrett arrived promptly at 6, looking somewhat transformed from the working rancher Vanessa had seen earlier. His clothes, while still practical, were clean and pressed. He had shaved, and his dark hair was neatly combed beneath his hat. "Miss Lawson," he greeted her, hat in hand. "You look well this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I feel much restored after a good night's sleep in a proper bed." The slight awkwardness between them eased as they set off down the main street. Garrett pointed out the various businesses and institutions of Watsonville: the bank, the telegraph office, the church that doubled as a meeting hall for special occasions. "And of course, you already know the school," he said as they passed the freshly cleaned building. "It looks even better in the evening light," Vanessa observed. "I can hardly wait to begin teaching." They continued walking, reaching the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open country. The setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "It's beautiful here," Vanessa said softly. "So different from the city." "Do you miss Denver?" Garrett asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "The libraries, the concerts, the bustle of people. But there's a peace here that I never found there." They turned back toward town, their pace unhurried. As they walked, Garrett told her about the surrounding ranches, the seasonal rhythms of life in the valley, and the people who made up the community of Watsonville. "Most folks here are decent," he said. "Hard-working, honest. We look out for each other because out here that's what keeps you alive." "And Silas Thornton?" Vanessa couldn't help asking. Garrett's expression darkened. "Thornton is the exception. He came here 3 years ago, bought the old saloon, and turned it into the kind of place decent women avoid. The town tolerates him because his establishment brings in business from surrounding areas, but nobody trusts him. He lied to me," Vanessa said quietly. "Wrote to me in Denver claiming to represent the town's school board, offering a teaching position. By the time I discovered the truth, I had spent my savings on the journey and had nowhere else to go." Garrett's jaw tightened. "That fits his pattern. He's brought other women here under false pretenses." "What happened to them?" Vanessa asked, dreading the answer. "Some gave in and worked in his saloon. Others moved on when they could. A few found legitimate employment or married local men. They had reached Mrs. Hollister's boarding house again." Vanessa paused at the gate, reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you for the tour," she said, "and for telling me the truth about Mr. Thornton. I appreciate knowing what I'm facing." "You don't have to face him at all," Garrett said firmly. "The town has accepted you as its teacher. Thornton has no claim on you." "I know," Vanessa said, "but I can't help feeling that he isn't finished with me yet." Garrett studied her face in the gathering twilight. "If he bothers you again, you'll tell me." The protectiveness in his voice warmed something inside her. "Yes," she promised. "Good." He seemed to want to say more, but instead reached for her hand. His fingers were calloused but gentle as they closed around hers. "Good night, Miss Lawson." "Good night, Mr. Blackwell," she replied, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. "And thank you again for everything." As Vanessa prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking about Garrett Blackwell, his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to notice such things about a man. After her father's death, Vanessa and her mother had struggled to survive on the meager pension the government provided. There had been no time for courtship or romance, only endless work and worry. When her mother succumbed to consumption 3 years ago, Vanessa had been truly alone in the world. The teaching position in Denver had been her salvation, a chance to use her education and support herself with dignity. Its loss, when the school closed due to lack of funds, had driven her to respond to Silas's deceptive offer. Now, against all odds, she had been given another chance. Vanessa determined not to waste it by dwelling on the past or worrying too much about the future. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight she would sleep peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was where she belonged. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Vanessa prepared for her first day of teaching. She visited every family with school-age children, introducing herself and learning about each potential student's needs and abilities. The parents were uniformly welcoming, eager for their children to receive an education that many of them had been denied. On Sunday morning, Vanessa attended services at the small church, where Reverend Thomas introduced her to the congregation. Many of the townspeople she had already met. Others approached her after the service, offering welcome and support. "We're mighty pleased to have a real teacher again," said Mrs. Bennett, whose twin boys would be starting school the next day. "Those two are too clever by half, need something to keep their minds busy besides mischief." "I'll do my best," Vanessa promised, smiling at the freckle-faced boys who looked angelic but had a definite glint of devilry in their eyes. As the congregation dispersed, Vanessa noticed Garrett standing a little apart from the others. He nodded in greeting but made no move to approach. Vanessa felt a twinge of disappointment. She hadn't seen him since their evening walk 3 days ago. Making her way through the crowd, she reached his side. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell. I didn't expect to see you here." "I don't attend regularly," he admitted, "but I thought you might appreciate a familiar face on your first Sunday in town." The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Vanessa deeply. "That was very kind of you." Before Garrett could respond, Mayor Jenkins bustled over, his wife in tow. "Miss Lawson, I trust you're all settled in and ready for tomorrow." "Yes, Mr. Mayor. The schoolhouse is prepared, and I've met most of the families." "Excellent, excellent. My wife and I would be honored if you would join us for Sunday dinner. Garrett, you're welcome as well, of course." Garrett hesitated, but something in Vanessa's expression, perhaps a silent plea not to leave her alone with the verbose mayor, made him nod. "Thank you. I'd be pleased to join you." Dinner at the Jenkins home was a somewhat formal affair, with the mayor's wife serving her best china and making nervous conversation about the latest fashions from Denver. Garrett said little, but his steady presence across the table was reassuring to Vanessa, who found Mrs. Jenkins' chatter rather overwhelming. "How is your ranch faring this season, Mr. Blackwell?" the mayor asked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "Well enough," Garrett replied. "The spring calves are strong, and if the weather holds, we should have a good hay crop." "You manage the entire operation yourself?" Vanessa asked, genuinely curious. "I have 2 ranch hands who help with the cattle and the heaviest work," Garrett explained. "But yes, much of it falls to me." "It's a fine spread," Mayor Jenkins told Vanessa. "One of the most prosperous in the county, thanks to Garrett's hard work." "And good fortune with the weather," Garrett added modestly. After dinner, as they walked back toward Mrs. Hollister's, Vanessa found herself alone with Garrett for the first time that day. The afternoon sun was warm, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of late summer flowers. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Garrett asked. "A little," Vanessa admitted. "First days are always challenging, establishing routines, setting expectations, assessing where each student stands academically." "The children will love you," Garrett said with such certainty that Vanessa blushed. "I hope so. I want to make a difference in their lives." They had reached Mrs. Hollister's gate. Vanessa turned to face Garrett, suddenly shy. "Will I see you again soon?" "If you'd like," he said, his expression guarded but hopeful. "I would," Vanessa said simply. Garrett's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and care. "Then you will." That night, Vanessa slept fitfully, her mind racing with plans for her first day of teaching. She rose before dawn, dressed carefully in her most professional-looking attire, and checked her lesson plans one last time before heading to the schoolhouse. The morning was crisp, with a hint of autumn in the air. As Vanessa approached the school, she was surprised to see a small figure sitting on the steps, waiting. "Good morning," she called. "You're quite early." The girl, perhaps 10 or 11, stood up quickly, smoothing her well-worn but clean dress. "Good morning, Miss Lawson. I'm Sarah Miller." "I wanted to be first." Vanessa smiled, charmed by the child's eagerness. "Well, Sarah Miller, would you like to help me prepare for the day?" Sarah's face lit up. "Yes, madam." Together they opened windows to let in the fresh air, filled the water bucket, and arranged books on the shelves. By the time the school bell rang at 8 o'clock, the room was ready for the 23 students who filed in with varying degrees of enthusiasm. "Welcome," Vanessa said, standing before her class with a confidence born of genuine passion for teaching. "I'm Miss Lawson, and I'm very pleased to meet all of you." The morning passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and establishing classroom procedures. Vanessa divided the students into groups based on their reading abilities, assigned appropriate work to each, and began the process of learning each child's strengths and challenges. By noon, When she dismissed them for lunch, Vanessa felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The children were bright and mostly well-behaved, with only a few discipline issues that she had handled firmly but kindly. As the students scattered to eat their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Vanessa sank into her chair, grateful for a moment's rest. A knock at the open door made her look up. Garrett stood in the doorway holding a basket. "Mrs. Hollister thought you might appreciate some lunch," he said, stepping inside. "She mentioned you left without eating this morning." "That's very thoughtful," Vanessa said, suddenly aware of her hunger. "Please come in." Garrett set the basket on her desk and lifted the cloth covering to reveal a hearty meal: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple tarts. "How's your first day going?" "Wonderfully," Vanessa replied, accepting the plate he offered. "The children are eager to learn and I'm enjoying getting to know them." Garrett leaned against the edge of her desk, his own plate balanced in one hand. "Any troublemakers?" "The Bennett twins show promise in that direction," Vanessa laughed. "And there's one older boy, James Foster, who seems determined to test my authority. But nothing I can't handle." "James's father is hard on him," Garrett said quietly. "Expects him to be a man already, though he's 14, 15, Vanessa corrected. "And yes, I sensed there might be difficulties at home." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the children play in the schoolyard through the open window. "Will you come by again?" Vanessa asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "If you'd like," Garrett said, echoing his words from the day before. "I would," Vanessa replied, just as she had then. But this time she added, "Perhaps. Perhaps you might escort me to the Harvest Festival on Saturday. Mrs. Hollister mentioned it's quite an event." Garrett's eyes widened slightly, but his expression was pleased. "I'd be honored, Miss Lawson." The school bell rang, signaling the end of the lunch period. Garrett gathered the remains of their meal back into the basket. "I should let you get back to your students." As he turned to go, Vanessa impulsively caught his arm. "Thank you for checking on me today. It means a great deal." Garrett covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. "You're going to do fine, Miss Lawson, just fine." The rest of the day passed in a pleasant rhythm of lessons and activities. By the time Vanessa dismissed the class at 3 o'clock, she felt she had laid a solid foundation for the school year ahead. Walking back to Mrs. Hollister's, Vanessa found herself thinking once again of Garrett Blackwell. There was something about him that drew her, not just gratitude for his timely intervention with Silas, but an appreciation for his quiet strength, his thoughtfulness, and the way he seemed to truly see her. At dinner that evening, both Mrs. Hollister and Dr. Parker were eager to hear about her first day of teaching. "Sarah Miller couldn't stop talking about you when she came into the store this afternoon," Mrs. Hollister reported. "Said you're the best teacher ever." "After one day," Vanessa laughed. "That's hardly a fair assessment." "Children know," Dr. Parker said quietly. "They can sense who genuinely cares for them." The conversation drifted to town news and Mrs. Hollister's plans for her contribution to the Harvest Festival. "Will you be attending, Miss Lawson?" the doctor inquired. "Yes. Mr. Blackwell has kindly offered to escort me," Vanessa replied, trying to sound matter-of-fact. Mrs. Hollister and Dr. Parker exchanged knowing glances but made no comment beyond the doctor's mild, "How nice." The week passed swiftly as Vanessa settled into her new role. Each day brought fresh challenges and satisfactions as she worked with her diverse group of students. The younger children responded well to her gentle guidance, while the older ones gradually accepted her authority as they recognized her genuine interest in their progress. Even James Foster, after testing her patience with deliberate disruptions and challenging questions, began to show a grudging respect when Vanessa responded to his behavior with firm consistency rather than anger. Garrett did not visit the schoolhouse again that week, but Vanessa occasionally glimpsed him in town, attending to business at the general store or the bank. Each time, he acknowledged her with a nod or a tip of his hat, and each time, her heart beat a little faster at the sight of him. By Saturday, Vanessa found herself unaccountably nervous about the harvest festival. She spent extra time on her appearance, wearing her best dress, a sage green that complemented her auburn hair, and allowing Mrs. Hollister to help arrange her tresses in a more elaborate style than her usual simple bun. "You look lovely, my dear," Mrs. Hollister assured her. "Mr. Blackwell won't know what hit him." "Mrs. Hollister," Vanessa protested, her cheeks warming, "it's merely a community event. Everyone will be there." "Of course," the older woman agreed with a twinkle in her eye. "And yet I notice you've worn your best dress and spent an hour on your hair." Before Vanessa could form a suitably dignified response, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hollister hurried to answer it, returning a moment later with Garrett. He stood in the parlor doorway, hat in hand, looking more formally dressed than Vanessa had yet seen him. His dark blue shirt brought out the color of his eyes, and his black vest and trousers gave him an air of quiet elegance. "Miss Lawson," he said, his gaze taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Vanessa replied, suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." Mrs. Hollister beamed at them both. "Now don't you two worry about coming back early on my account. I'll be at the festival myself until the dancing ends." The town square had been transformed for the festival. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a warm glow over the gathering dusk. Tables laden with food lined one side, while an area had been cleared for dancing. A small group of musicians tuned their instruments on a makeshift stage. "It's wonderful," Vanessa breathed, taking in the festive scene. "Wait until you taste the food," Garrett said, guiding her through the crowd with a light hand at the small of her back. "Mrs. Peterson's apple pie alone is worth the price of admission." "And what price is that?" Vanessa asked, smiling up at him. "Enduring Mayor Jenkins' speech about the prosperity of Watsonville," Garrett replied with a straight face. Vanessa laughed, feeling more carefree than she had in months. The evening was perfect crisp autumn air, the scent of cinnamon and apples, the sound of music and happy voices, and Garrett Blackwell at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. They filled plates with delicious home-cooked food and found seats at one of the long tables. Vanessa was introduced to countless townspeople, all curious about the new teacher but welcoming in their own ways. After dinner, the mayor did indeed make a speech, followed by announcements of the winners in various harvest competitions: largest pumpkin, best preserves, finest needlework. Vanessa clapped enthusiastically for each recipient, enjoying the sense of community that permeated the event. When the music began in earnest, Garrett turned to her. "Would you care to dance, Miss Lawson?" "I'd be delighted," she replied, allowing him to lead her to the dance floor. Garrett was an unexpectedly graceful dancer, guiding Vanessa through the lively reel with confidence. His hand at her waist was respectful but firm, his steps sure as they moved together in time with the music. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Vanessa asked during a momentary pause in the pattern. "My mother insisted," Garrett replied, a hint of sadness crossing his features at the memory. "Said no son of hers would grow up without knowing how to properly escort a lady." "She taught you well," Vanessa said softly. The music slowed to a waltz, and Garrett drew her closer, still maintaining a proper distance but near enough that Vanessa could feel the warmth of him. They moved together as if they had danced 100 times before, their steps perfectly matched. "I haven't danced in years," Vanessa confessed. "Not since before my father died." "I'm honored to be your partner then," Garrett said, his voice low and sincere. As they circled the dance floor, Vanessa became aware of curious glances from the townspeople. She realized with a start that their presence together was likely causing speculation. The new teacher and the bachelor rancher. Dancing as if they belonged together, it was bound to start tongues wagging in a small town like Watsonville. Strangely, the thought didn't bother her as much as it might have. There was something right about being here with Garrett, something that felt like the beginning of a possibility she had long since stopped hoping for. The spell was broken when a commotion at the edge of the square drew everyone's attention. Silas Thornton and several of his saloon girls had arrived, already rowdy from drink. "Well, look at this fine gathering," Silas called out, his voice carrying over the music, which faltered and stopped. "Room for a few more." Mayor Jenkins hurried over, his expression strained. "Mr. Thornton, this is a family event. Perhaps your companions would be more comfortable at your establishment." "Now, Mayor, we're all citizens of Watsonville, aren't we?" Silas's gaze swept the crowd, stopping when he spotted Vanessa in Garrett's arms. His eyes narrowed. "Well, well. If it isn't my runaway employee and her gallant protector." Garrett's arm tightened around Vanessa's waist. "Evening, Thornton," he said, his voice level but with an edge of steel. "Enjoying the festival?" "More now," Silas replied with an unpleasant smile. "Didn't expect to see my investment dancing with the local hero." "I was never your investment," Vanessa said, finding her voice. "You lied to me about the teaching position." "Did I?" Silas affected surprise. "Must have been a misunderstanding. But now that you mention it, I do recall fronting the money for your stage fare. $25, wasn't it? Which I paid in full," Garrett said coldly. "You have no claim on Miss Lawson." Several of the townsmen had moved closer, forming a protective circle around the festival goers. The tension in the air was palpable. "Perhaps not," Silas conceded, apparently realizing he was outnumbered. "But I wonder what the good people of Watsonville would think if they knew their new teacher once worked in my establishment." "I served drinks for 2 weeks while trying to find legitimate employment," Vanessa said clearly, wanting the truth known rather than Silas's insinuations. "I left as soon as I understood what Mr. Thornton really wanted from me." There were murmurs of sympathy from the crowd. Mrs. Bennett stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Vanessa's arm. "We know your character, Miss Lawson. Our children adore you already." Silas looked around, realizing his attempt to humiliate Vanessa had failed. "Well then," he said with a forced laugh, "no harm done. Just thought I'd pay my respects to our esteemed teacher. Come on, ladies, seems this party is too respectable for us." He sauntered away, his companions trailing behind him. Gradually, the tension dissipated, and the musicians tentatively resumed playing. The dance floor remained empty, however, as people clustered in small groups, discussing the incident. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said to Garrett, mortified that their lovely evening had been disrupted. "I knew he wasn't finished with me." "None of this is your fault," Garrett assured her. "Thornton enjoys causing trouble, it's his nature." Mayor Jenkins approached them, looking concerned. "Miss Lawson, I want to assure you that nothing Mr. Thornton said has affected the town's opinion of you. We're all aware of his questionable character." "Thank you, Mr. Mayor," Vanessa said gratefully. "I appreciate your support." As the evening wore on, the incident was gradually forgotten as people returned to dancing and socializing. Vanessa found herself surrounded by supportive townspeople, each eager to express their appreciation for her teaching and their disregard for Silas's insinuations. Still, a shadow had been cast over what had been a perfect evening. When Garrett suggested they might take a walk to escape the curious glances still coming their way, Vanessa readily agreed. They strolled along the moonlit street, away from the lanterns and music of the festival. The night air had grown cooler, and Garrett draped his jacket over Vanessa's shoulders. "Thank you," she said, drawing the warmth of it around her. "Not just for the jacket, but for standing by me back there." "You stood up for yourself quite admirably," Garrett observed. "You didn't need my protection." "Perhaps not," Vanessa acknowledged, "but it's nice to know it's there if I do need it." They walked in silence for a while, eventually reaching the schoolhouse. By unspoken agreement, they sat on the steps, looking up at the star-filled sky. "When I first came to Watsonville," Garrett said quietly, "I was running away from memories. The war had left its mark on me not just physically, but here." He tapped his temple. "I couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of the men I'd killed, the friends I'd lost." Vanessa listened, understanding that he was sharing something deeply personal. "I bought the ranch because it was isolated," he continued. "I thought if I worked hard enough during the day, I might sleep without dreams at night." "Did it work?" Vanessa asked softly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But the real healing came when I started to connect with the community, when I stopped seeing myself as separate and alone." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "What I'm trying to say, Vanessa, is that I understand what it means to start over. To build a new life from the ashes of the old." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. "Garrett," she said, testing the sound of his name on her lips. "I think perhaps we're more alike than different." His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with her own. "I've been alone a long time," he said. "Until you arrived, I thought that was how it would always be. Now, I find myself hoping for something more." Vanessa's heart raced at his words. "What are you hoping for?" "Time," he said simply. "Time to know you better. Time to see if what I'm feeling might be returned." "It is," Vanessa whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. "Whatever you're feeling, I feel it too." Garrett's fingers tightened around hers. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned closer. His lips, when they touched hers, were warm and gentle, the kiss a question more than a demand. Vanessa answered by leaning into him, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, strong and steady, like the man himself. When they parted, Garrett rested his forehead against hers for a moment. "I've wanted to do that since the day we met," he confessed. "Even when I was dusty and frightened?" Vanessa asked with a small laugh. "Even then," he confirmed. "There was something about you, a strength beneath the fear. It called to me." They sat together a while longer, talking quietly about their pasts, their presents, and tentatively, their futures. When the distant sound of the festival winding down reached them, Garrett stood and offered Vanessa his hand. "I should escort you back to Mrs. Hollister's before the gossips have even more to discuss," he said with a rueful smile. "Let them talk," Vanessa said lightly, though she rose to her feet. "I've done nothing to be ashamed of." "Nor have I," Garrett agreed, "but your reputation as the town's teacher is important. I wouldn't want to compromise it." His consideration touched her deeply. "You're a good man, Garrett Blackwell." They walked back toward the boarding house, hands still linked, each lost in thoughts of what this night might mean for their future. At Mrs. Hollister's gate, Garrett paused. "May I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps we could take a ride out to my ranch if you'd like to see it." "I'd like that very much," Vanessa replied. He kissed her once more, briefly but with unmistakable feeling, before bidding her good night. Vanessa watched him walk away, her heart fuller than it had been in years. Inside, Mrs. Hollister was waiting up, pretending to read but clearly eager for details. "Did you enjoy the festival, my dear?" "Very much," Vanessa said, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. Despite Mr. Thornton's interruption. "That man," Mrs. Hollister clucked her tongue. Always stirring up trouble, but I noticed it didn't spoil your evening entirely. You and Mr. Blackwell seemed quite companionable." Vanessa smiled, unwilling to share the precious moments they had spent at the schoolhouse. "He's invited me to visit his ranch tomorrow." "Has he now, Mrs.?" Hollister's eyebrows rose. "Well, that's a first. Garrett Blackwell has never invited a lady to his ranch before, to my knowledge." "Never." Vanessa couldn't hide her surprise. "Not since he's lived here," Mrs. Hollister confirmed. "He's always been polite but private. Keeps his personal life separate from the town." The knowledge that she was the exception to Garrett's usual reserve made Vanessa's happiness deepen. Perhaps what was growing between them was as special to him as it was to her. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for a ride in the country. Vanessa dressed carefully in her most practical skirt and a sturdy blouse, then braided her hair to keep it tidy during the ride. Garrett arrived on horseback, leading a gentle-looking mare. "Good morning," he greeted Vanessa with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I thought you might enjoy riding rather than taking the buggy. It's a fine day for it." "I'd love to ride," Vanessa said, "though I should warn you it's been some time since I was on horseback." "Daisy here is the gentlest mount on my ranch," Garrett assured her, helping Vanessa into the saddle. "She'll take good care of you." True to his word, the mare was docile and responsive, following Garrett's stallion with little guidance needed from Vanessa. They rode at a leisurely pace through town and out into the open countryside beyond. "It's beautiful," Vanessa said, taking in the rolling hills dotted with grazing cattle and the distant mountains that framed the valley. "This is all Watsonville land," Garrett explained. "Mostly small ranches and farms. My property begins just beyond that rise." As they crested the hill, Vanessa caught her first glimpse of Garrett's ranch. A well-built house of timber and stone stood in a sheltered hollow, surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures. A stream wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees just beginning to turn golden with autumn. "Oh, Garrett," Vanessa breathed. "It's lovely." "It's home," he said simply, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. They rode down to the ranch yard where a weathered man in his 60s emerged from one of the barns. "Mornin', boss," he called. "Didn't expect you back so early." "Morning, Frank," Garrett replied, dismounting and moving to help Vanessa down. "This is Miss Lawson, Watsonville's new teacher." "Miss Lawson, this is Frank Miller, my foreman and right hand." "Pleased to meet you, madam," Frank said, touching his hat respectfully. "My Sarah talks about you non-stop. Says you're teaching her mathematics that'll make her head explode." Vanessa laughed, recognizing the name of her enthusiastic student. "Sarah is a delight to teach, Mr. Miller. She has a quick mind." "Gets that from her mother, rest her soul," Frank said with a sad smile. "Not from her old pa, that's for sure." "Frank has been with me since I bought this place," Garrett explained. "Taught me everything I know about ranching." "Now don't you go giving me too much credit," Frank protested. "You had the vision for this place. I just helped with the details." Garrett showed Vanessa around the ranch, from the well-organized barns to the productive vegetable garden behind the house. Everywhere she looked, Vanessa saw evidence of careful stewardship and hard work. "You've built something wonderful here," she said as they approached the house. "It must have taken tremendous dedication." "It gave me purpose when I needed it most," Garrett replied. "After the war I was adrift, lost. The ranch saved me in a way." Inside, the house was simply but comfortably furnished with sturdy wooden furniture and practical amenities. The main room featured a stone fireplace, bookshelves filled with well-used volumes, and windows that framed the spectacular view of the mountains. "Would you like some coffee?" Garrett asked, suddenly seeming a bit nervous to have her in his private space. That would be nice, Vanessa said, moving to examine the bookshelves while Garrett busied himself in the kitchen area. She was impressed by his collection, not just practical manuals on ranching and agriculture, but classics of literature, history books, and even poetry. This was the library of a thoughtful, educated man. "You have quite a collection," she commented when Garrett returned with 2 steaming mugs. "Reading helps pass the winter evenings," he said, handing her a cup. "Though I admit some of those books haven't been opened in years." They sat by the fireplace, though it was not cold enough to need a fire. Vanessa felt strangely at home in this place that she had never seen before today. "Tell me more about yourself," Garrett said. "Your life before Watsonville." Vanessa cradled her mug, gathering her thoughts. "There isn't much to tell. I grew up in Ohio. My father was a school teacher, which is where I got my love of education. When the war came, he enlisted with the Union Army. He died at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Garrett said softly. "It changed everything," Vanessa continued. "My mother took in sewing to support us, and I helped as I could. When I was 18, I was accepted to the normal school in Boston. Mother scraped together enough for my first year's tuition, and I worked for the rest." She took a sip of her coffee before continuing. "After graduation, I taught in Denver for 2 years. It was a good position, but when the school lost its funding, I found myself without employment. That's when I saw Mr. Thornton's advertisement and came to Watsonville," Garrett finished. "Yes," Vanessa said, "though not in the way I expected." "Do you regret it?" Garrett asked, watching her face carefully. "Coming here, I mean." "No," Vanessa said without hesitation. "Despite the circumstances, I feel I've found where I'm supposed to be." Garrett set his cup aside and reached for her hand. "I'm glad you came to Watsonville, Vanessa, more than I can express." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "So am I," she whispered. They spent the day exploring the ranch, riding out to see the cattle grazing on the autumn golden grass and visiting a nearby stream where Garrett showed Vanessa the beaver dam his ranch hands had been monitoring. "They're ingenious creatures," he said, watching the rippling water. "Reshape the entire landscape to suit their needs. Like humans," Vanessa observed, "though perhaps with more wisdom. They work with nature rather than against it." Garrett looked at her with appreciation. "That's exactly how I try to run my ranch, working with the land, not forcing it to yield more than it can sustain." As the afternoon waned, they rode back to the ranch house, where Frank's wife, Martha, had prepared a simple but delicious meal. The 4 of them ate together in the kitchen, talking easily about the ranch, the school, and life in Watsonville. "You should bring Sarah over for dinner sometime," Vanessa suggested to Martha. "I'd love to get to know her better outside of school." "That would be wonderful, Miss Lawson," Martha said warmly. "She thinks the world of you already." After the meal, as the sun began to set, Garrett suggested they should start back to town. "I don't want you riding after dark," he explained. "The trail can be tricky in places." They bid farewell to Frank and Martha, promising to visit again soon. As they rode away, Vanessa looked back at the ranch house, glowing golden in the late afternoon light. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said, "for sharing your home with me." "I've never brought anyone here before," Garrett admitted. "Not like this." The simple statement, echoing what Mrs. Hollister had told her, filled Vanessa with quiet joy. "I'm honored then." They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As they neared town, Garrett spoke again. "Vanessa, I want you to know that I care for you deeply, more than I expected to care for anyone again." "I care for you too," she replied, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "I'm not a man who rushes into things," he continued. "And I respect your position in the community. I wouldn't want to compromise that in any way." "I understand," Vanessa said, though a part of her feared he was pulling away. "What I'm trying to say," Garrett said, drawing his horse to a halt and turning to face her, "is that I want to court you properly, with the respect you deserve." Relief and happiness flooded through Vanessa. "I would like that very much, Garrett." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." They continued into town, where curious eyes noted their return. Garrett escorted Vanessa to Mrs. Hollister's door, lifting her down from the saddle with gentle hands. "Thank you for today," she said, reluctant for their time together to end. "May I call on you again on Wednesday evening?" Garrett asked. "Perhaps we could take a walk after you're done with school." "I'd like that," Vanessa smiled. He kissed her hand in parting, a gentleman's gesture that somehow felt more intimate than it should have. Vanessa watched him ride away, her heart full of possibilities. The following weeks established a pattern that brought joy to Vanessa's days. She taught during the week, finding fulfillment in her students' progress and the community support. Garrett called on her regularly, sometimes for walks around town, other times for rides in the countryside. Each time they were together, the connection between them deepened. October gave way to November, bringing colder weather and the first dusting of snow to the mountains surrounding Watsonville. The town began preparations for Thanksgiving, with talk of a community celebration at the church. One Wednesday afternoon, as Vanessa was dismissing her students, she noticed Silas Thornton lingering across the street, watching the schoolhouse. When he saw her notice him, he tipped his hat mockingly and sauntered away. The encounter left Vanessa unsettled. Though Silas had made no further attempts to harass her since the Harvest Festival, his presence was a reminder that not everyone in Watsonville wished her well. That evening, when Garrett called for their usual walk, Vanessa mentioned seeing Silas. "He didn't approach you or speak to you?" Garrett asked, his expression darkening. "No, he just watched. It made me uncomfortable." "I'll have a word with him," Garrett said, his voice hard. "No, please don't." Vanessa laid a hand on his arm. "It would only provoke him. I'm probably overreacting. He was just walking past." Garrett looked unconvinced but nodded. "If he bothers you again in any way, you'll tell me." "I promise," Vanessa said, touched by his concern. They walked to the edge of town, where the last houses gave way to open country. The evening was cold but clear, the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Garrett said as they turned back toward town. "Christmas will be here before we know it." "Yes, the children are already talking about it," Vanessa smiled. "I'm planning a small pageant for the last day of school before the holiday." "I'd like you to spend Christmas Day at the ranch," Garrett said. "Frank and Martha will be there, and Sarah, of course. It would mean a great deal to me to have you there as well." The invitation touched Vanessa deeply. "I'd be honored, Garrett. Thank you." He took her hand, his gloved fingers entwining with hers. "There's something else I've been wanting to ask you." Vanessa's heart quickened at the seriousness in his tone. "Yes." Before Garrett could continue, shouts from the direction of town interrupted them. They turned to see a figure running toward them, calling Garrett's name. "That's Frank's boy, Thomas," Garrett said, squinting in the dim light. "Something must be wrong." They hurried to meet the boy, who was breathless with exertion. "Mr. Blackwell," he gasped. "Pa sent me to find you." "There's trouble at the ranch. Rustlers hit the north pasture. They've driven off about 30 head." "When?" Garrett demanded. "Just before sunset," Thomas replied. "Pa and the hands are tracking them, but he said to tell you they're headed toward the canyon." Garrett's expression hardened. "I need to go," he told Vanessa. "Thomas, can you see Miss Lawson safely to Mrs. Hollister's?" "Of course, sir." Garrett squeezed Vanessa's hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'll come to you as soon as this is resolved." "Be careful," Vanessa urged, sudden fear gripping her. "Rustlers can be dangerous." "I will," he promised, and then he was gone, running toward the livery stable where his horse was kept when he was in town. Thomas escorted Vanessa back to the boarding house, filling her in on what little more he knew about the situation. Mrs. Hollister was appropriately concerned when she heard the news. "Cattle rustling has been a problem in these parts lately," she told Vanessa as they sat in the parlor after Thomas had left. "The Wilkins Ranch lost nearly 50 head last month. Is it dangerous?" Vanessa asked, unable to hide her worry. "It can be," Mrs. Hollister admitted. "Rustlers are desperate men and they won't hesitate to fight if cornered." Vanessa barely slept that night, her mind filled with images of Garrett facing armed criminals in the darkness. The next day at school she found it difficult to concentrate, though she did her best to hide her concern from her students. When school ended, she hurried back to Mrs. Hollister's, hoping for news. There was none. That evening, as she prepared for bed, a knock at the front door brought her rushing downstairs. Dr. Parker was speaking quietly to Mrs. Hollister in the hallway. He looked up as Vanessa appeared. "Miss Lawson, I thought you should know Mr. Blackwell has been injured." Vanessa's heart seemed to stop. "How badly?" "Where is he?" "He's at his ranch. Frank Miller brought him in a few hours ago. The injury isn't life-threatening, a bullet wound to the shoulder, but he lost a fair amount of blood." "I need to go to him," Vanessa said immediately. "It's too late to travel tonight," Dr. Parker said gently, "and he's resting comfortably. I've treated the wound and Martha Miller is looking after him." "But I'll take you out there first thing in the morning," the doctor promised. "He asked for you, but I told him you weren't to be disturbed at this hour." Vanessa wanted to protest further but knew the doctor was right. The road to Garrett's ranch would be dangerous in the dark. "First light," she insisted. "First light," Dr. Parker agreed. The night seemed endless. Vanessa lay awake, alternating between prayer and worry. When the first gray light of dawn appeared at her window, she was already dressed and ready. True to his word, Dr. Parker arrived with his buggy just as the sun was rising. They set off immediately, the doctor filling Vanessa in on what had happened. "Garrett and his men caught up to the rustlers in Cottonwood Canyon," he explained. "There was a confrontation, shots fired on both sides. 2 of the rustlers were killed, the others escaped, but not before one of them put a bullet in Garrett's shoulder." "And the cattle?" Vanessa asked. "Recovered. Frank and the hands drove them back to the ranch last night." When they arrived at the ranch, Martha greeted them at the door, her kind face lined with fatigue. "He's awake," she told Vanessa. "Been asking for you since dawn." Vanessa followed Martha to Garrett's bedroom, her heart in her throat. He was propped up against pillows, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but alert. "Vanessa," he said, his voice stronger than she had feared. "You didn't need to come all this way." "Of course I did," she replied, moving to his side and taking his right hand in both of hers. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot," he said with a wry smile. "But the doctor assures me I'll live." Dr. Parker examined the wound, nodding with satisfaction. "No sign of infection. The bullet went clean through, which is fortunate. You'll need to rest that arm for several weeks, but with proper care, you should regain full use of it." "Thank you, doctor," Garrett said, "for everything." After the doctor left to speak with Frank about Garrett's care, Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed, still holding Garrett's hand. "You frightened me," she said softly, "when Dr. Parker told me you'd been shot." "I'm sorry," Garrett said, his fingers tightening around hers. "I didn't mean to worry you." "What happened out there?" Vanessa asked. Garrett's expression darkened. "We tracked the rustlers to the canyon. They were pushing the cattle hard, trying to reach the territorial border. We managed to cut them off, but they were desperate, opened fire as soon as they saw us." He shifted slightly, wincing as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. "We returned fire," 2 of them went down. The others fled, but not before one of them got a lucky shot at me. Did you recognize any of them? Vanessa asked. Garrett hesitated. One of them looked familiar, but it was getting dark and everything happened so fast. Familiar how? Like someone I've seen in town, Garrett said. But I can't be certain. Vanessa stayed with Garrett through the day, reading to him when he was awake, watching over him when he drifted into sleep. By evening, some color had returned to his face, and he insisted he was feeling stronger. You should go back to town, he told her. You have school tomorrow. I've already sent word that classes will be canceled for the day, Vanessa said firmly. I'm staying tonight at least. Garrett looked as though he might argue, then smiled instead. I won't pretend I'm not glad to have you here. Martha prepared a room for Vanessa across the hall from Garrett's and insisted she get some rest. You won't help him by exhausting yourself, she said sensibly. Though she had expected sleep to elude her, Vanessa fell into a deep slumber almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. The emotional strain of the past 24 hours had taken its toll. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. After washing and dressing quickly, she went to check on Garrett before heading to the kitchen. He was awake, looking much improved. Good morning, he greeted her with a smile. You look beautiful, Vanessa laughed, touching her hastily arranged hair self-consciously. I look like I slept in my clothes, which I nearly did. Beautiful nonetheless, Garrett insisted. Martha appeared with a tray of breakfast for Garrett. The doctor says you can try sitting up in a chair today if you feel up to it, she told him. But no exertion of any kind. I'll make sure he follows orders, Vanessa promised. After breakfast, with Vanessa's help, Garrett managed to get up and move to a comfortable chair by the window. The simple activity left him pale and sweating, but he refused to return to bed. Fresh air and sunshine will do me good, he insisted. Vanessa pulled up a chair beside him, and they sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the ranch activities through the window. There's something I need to tell you, Garrett said eventually. Something I've been thinking about since yesterday. What is it? Vanessa asked, noting the seriousness in his tone. When I was lying in that canyon, bleeding and unsure if help would reach me in time, I had only one regret, Garrett said, his eyes holding hers. That I hadn't told you how much I love you. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. Garrett, I know it may be too soon, he continued. We've known each other only a few months, but life out here is uncertain, as yesterday proved. I don't want to waste another day without you knowing how I feel. I love you too, Vanessa said, the words coming easily now that they had been spoken first. I think I have since that first day when you stepped between me and Walt's whip. Garrett reached for her hand, drawing her closer until she was perched on the edge of his chair. I want to marry you, Vanessa. Not today, not tomorrow, but when you're ready, when you're sure. I'm sure now, Vanessa said softly. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. His kiss was gentle but filled with promise. When they parted, Garrett's eyes held a light that had nothing to do with the sunshine streaming through the window. I don't have a ring to give you yet, he said apologetically. I don't need a ring, Vanessa replied. Just your word. You have that and more, Garrett promised. My word, my heart, my life, they're yours, Vanessa Lawson, if you'll have them. I will, she said, sealing the promise with another kiss. They were still sitting together making plans for their future when Frank burst into the room without knocking. Sorry to interrupt, boss, he said, his expression urgent, but Sheriff Matthews is here. Says he needs to speak with you right away. The sheriff, a weather-beaten man in his 50s, entered behind Frank. He nodded respectfully to Vanessa before addressing Garrett. Blackwell, we've identified one of the rustlers killed yesterday. Name was Jake Wilson. Used to work for Silas Thornton. Garrett's expression hardened. I thought he looked familiar. He was in the saloon the night I paid Thornton for Miss Lawson's stage fare. The sheriff nodded. That's not all. We found Thornton's brand on 3 of the cattle you recovered. They were part of a group he purchased last month. You think Thornton is behind the rustling? Garrett asked. It's starting to look that way, the sheriff confirmed. We've had 5 incidents in the past 3 months. Each time the rustlers seem to know exactly where the herds would be vulnerable. Inside information, Garrett said grimly. Exactly. Thornton's been buying drinks for ranch hands all over the county, getting them talking. And it seems he's not just gathering information, he's providing the manpower for the actual rustling. Have you confronted him? Garrett asked. The sheriff shook his head. Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first, see if you recalled anything else about the men you encountered yesterday. Garrett thought for a moment. There were 4 of them. 2 went down. Wilson must have been one of them. The other 2 fled on horseback. One was tall, wearing a black duster. The other was shorter, with a red bandana. That matches the description of 2 of Thornton's regular customers, the sheriff said. I'll need to gather more evidence before I move against him, but this is a start. After the sheriff left, Vanessa turned to Garrett, concern etched on her face. If Thornton is behind this, he's more dangerous than we thought, and he already has reason to dislike both of us. The sheriff will handle it, Garrett assured her, though his expression remained troubled. Thornton won't risk everything for a personal vendetta. But Vanessa wasn't convinced. Be careful, Garrett. Promise me you won't try to confront him yourself, especially while you're injured. I promise, Garrett said, squeezing her hand. Nothing is going to keep me from marrying you, Vanessa Lawson. Not Silas Thornton, not rustlers, not anything. Vanessa stayed at the ranch for 2 more days before reluctantly returning to town and her teaching duties. Garrett was recovering well, but it would be at least a week before he could safely ride to town to see her. The separation was difficult after the intensity of their time together, but Vanessa threw herself into her work, preparing her students for their Christmas pageant and trying not to worry about Garrett or the threat that Silas Thornton might pose. On Friday afternoon, as Vanessa was closing up the schoolhouse for the weekend, she sensed rather than saw someone behind her. Turning quickly, she found herself face to face with Silas. Good afternoon, Miss Lawson, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're looking well. Teaching seems to agree with you more than serving drinks in my establishment. What do you want, Mr. Thornton? Vanessa asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. Just passing the time of day with our esteemed teacher, Silas replied, leaning against the schoolhouse door frame. I hear your cowboy friend had an unfortunate accident recently. The way he said it with a hint of satisfaction made Vanessa's blood run cold. If you're referring to Mr. Blackwell, he's recovering well, thank you. Good to hear, Silas said insincerely. Bullet wounds can be tricky. Never know when complications might set in. Is that a threat, Mr. Thornton? Vanessa asked, anger overcoming her fear. Not at all, Silas straightened, adjusting his hat. Just an observation from someone who's seen his share of gunshot wounds. You take care now, Miss Lawson. These frontier towns can be dangerous places for a woman alone. He tipped his hat and sauntered away, leaving Vanessa shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. She knew she should report the encounter to Sheriff Matthews, but what could she say? Silas had threatened nothing directly. It was all implication and insinuation. Instead, she decided to visit Garrett the next day. She needed to see him, to warn him about Silas's implied threats, and, if she was honest with herself, to reassure herself that he was truly recovering well. Mrs. Hollister was concerned when Vanessa told her of her plans. Riding out there alone isn't wise, my dear. Not with what's been happening. I'll be fine, Vanessa insisted. It's broad daylight and the trail to Garrett's ranch is well traveled. At least let Dr. Parker accompany you, Mrs. Hollister pleaded. He mentioned he wanted to check on Garrett's wound anyway. Vanessa reluctantly agreed, recognizing the wisdom in not traveling alone. The next morning, she and Dr. Parker set out early, reaching the ranch by mid-morning. Garrett was surprised but delighted to see them. He had indeed improved remarkably in the days since Vanessa had left, and was able to move around the house with minimal discomfort, though his left arm remained in a sling. While Dr. Parker examined Garrett's wound, Vanessa helped Martha prepare lunch in the kitchen. When the men joined them, Garrett's expression told Vanessa that the doctor had given him good news. The wound is healing cleanly, Dr. Parker confirmed. You're a fortunate man, Mr. Blackwell. An inch to the right and we might be having a very different conversation. After lunch, Dr. Parker announced his intention to visit a patient on a neighboring ranch before returning to town. Will you be coming back with me, Miss Lawson, or staying here? Vanessa glanced at Garrett, who answered for her. If Miss Lawson would like to stay, Frank can escort her back to town tomorrow. I would like to stay, Vanessa said, if it's no imposition. None whatsoever, Martha assured her. Once they were alone, Garrett led Vanessa to the porch swing that hung from the eaves of the front porch. The November day was cold but clear, the sun providing enough warmth to make sitting outside pleasant. Not that I'm not delighted to see you, Garrett said as they settled side by side, but I sense there's more to your visit than checking on my recovery. Vanessa nodded, telling him about her encounter with Silas. I can't prove he was threatening you, but the implication was clear. Garrett's expression darkened. The sheriff came by again yesterday. They found more evidence linking Thornton to the rustling operation. They're planning to arrest him early next week once all the paperwork is in order. That's good news, Vanessa said, relief evident in her voice. It is, Garrett agreed. But until then, I want you to be careful. Don't go anywhere alone and stay away from the saloon end of town. I will, Vanessa promised. But I'm more worried about you. You're still recovering, and if Silas suspects the law is closing in on him. I'm well guarded, Garrett assured her, gesturing to the rifle that stood propped by the front door. And Frank and the boys are keeping a close watch. No one approaches the ranch without us knowing about it. They spent the afternoon together, talking about their future where they would live after marrying at the ranch. They decided, with Vanessa continuing to teach, when the wedding might take place early spring, when travel would be easier for Vanessa's few relatives from back east, and how many children they hoped for. As many as God blesses us with, Garrett had said, his eyes warm with love. As evening approached, Vanessa noticed Garrett growing quieter, his expression thoughtful. What is it? She asked. Are you in pain? No, he assured her. Just thinking about how fortunate I am. A few months ago, I was resigned to spending my life alone. Now I have you. We're both fortunate, Vanessa said softly, leaning her head against his good shoulder. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Inside, they could hear Martha preparing dinner, the homely sounds of pots and pans creating a backdrop to their peaceful moment. The crack of a gunshot shattered the tranquility. Garrett was on his feet in an instant, pulling Vanessa with him into the shelter of the house. Frank! He shouted, reaching for the rifle by the door. Frank appeared from the direction of the barn, his own rifle in hand. Shot came from the north ridge, he reported. Thomas is checking the back of the property. Get inside, Garrett told Martha, who had appeared in the doorway. Stay away from the windows. Another shot rang out, this one splintering the wood of the porch railing. Garrett pushed Vanessa behind him, peering cautiously around the doorframe. I see movement in the trees, he said to Frank. 2 riders, maybe more. Rustlers again, Frank asked. Or Thornton's men, Garrett replied grimly. Either way, we need to get word to the sheriff. Thomas can go, Frank suggested. He knows the back trails can avoid being seen. Good idea. Garrett turned to Vanessa, who stood pale but composed in the hallway. Stay inside, away from windows. Martha will show you where it's safest. Martha led Vanessa to an interior room, a pantry with no windows, while the men organized their defense. Vanessa could hear Frank giving instructions to Thomas, then the sound of a horse galloping away from the ranch. How long will it take Thomas to reach town? She asked Martha. An hour, maybe more if he has to take the long way around, Martha replied, her face tight with worry. And then for the sheriff to gather his men and get back here. 2 or 3 hours at least, Vanessa finished. The realization that they would have to hold off the attackers for that long was daunting. Another shot sounded, followed by the crash of breaking glass. Garrett and Frank returned fire, their shots echoing in the gathering dusk. They're trying to draw us out, Garrett said, coming to check on Vanessa and Martha. Or keep us pinned down until dark. Either way, we need to be ready. Ready for what? Vanessa asked, though she feared she knew the answer. For them to make a move against the house, Garrett said grimly. Frank, how much ammunition do we have? Enough for now, Frank replied. But we need to make every shot count. As darkness fell, the shooting became more sporadic. Garrett and Frank took turns watching from carefully concealed positions, while Vanessa and Martha prepared bandages from torn sheets and kept water and food ready. They are moving closer, Garrett reported after a particularly intense exchange of gunfire. Using the darkness for cover. How many? Frank asked. At least 4 that I can see, Garrett replied, maybe more further back. A voice called out from the darkness. Blackwell, we know you're in there. Send out the woman and maybe we'll let the rest of you live. Vanessa's blood ran cold. It was Silas Thornton. That's not going to happen, Thornton, Garrett shouted back. The sheriff's on his way. You'd best clear out while you can. Silas's laugh floated through the night air. Nice try, but we've been watching the roads. No one's left this property. Vanessa realized with a sinking heart that Thomas must have been intercepted before he could reach town. Help was not coming. Garrett seemed to reach the same conclusion. We need a new plan, he said quietly to Frank. They'll rush the house before dawn, try to burn us out if nothing else. The back way, Frank suggested. Through the root cellar, it comes out near the creek bed. If someone could slip out that way, make it to town. Too risky, Garrett shook his head. They probably have the place surrounded by now. Vanessa stepped forward. Let me try, she said. They're watching for you or Frank, armed men. They might not notice a woman. Absolutely not, Garrett said firmly. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than staying here until they burn the house down around us, Vanessa challenged. I know the way to town. I can ride well enough to make it if I get a head start. She has a point, boss, Frank said reluctantly. They're not expecting someone to slip out. Might be our best chance. Garrett looked torn, his face a mask of conflict. Vanessa, if anything happened to you. And if anything happens to any of us because we didn't try, Vanessa countered. How would we live with that? In the end, it was Martha who settled the matter. She's right, Garrett, and she has the best chance of any of us. The men are looking for a fight. They might not shoot a woman on sight. Garrett closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. All right, but we need to create a diversion, draw their attention to the front of the house while you slip out the back. The plan was quickly formed. Martha would help Vanessa prepare, dressing her in dark clothes and showing her the route through the root cellar. Frank would saddle their fastest horse and have it waiting by the creek. Garrett would create a diversion by firing rapidly from different windows, making it seem as if the house had more defenders than it did. "Once you're clear of the property," Garrett instructed Vanessa, "ride hard for town. Don't stop for anything. Go straight to the sheriff's office." "I will," Vanessa promised. Before she left, Garrett pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I love you," he said against her hair. "Come back to me." "I will," Vanessa repeated, her voice steady despite her fear. "I promise." Martha led Vanessa to the root cellar, a small space dug beneath the house, accessible through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. A narrow tunnel, originally built as an escape route during the early days when Indian attacks were a concern, led from the cellar to an opening near the creek bed, concealed by brush. "It's a tight fit," Martha warned, "and it hasn't been used in years, but it should still be passable." Vanessa nodded, tucking her hair under a dark cap and wrapping a scarf around her lower face. "I'm ready." The diversion began rapid gunfire from the front of the house, accompanied by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Vanessa slipped through the trapdoor, Martha's whispered "God be with you" following her into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing Vanessa to crouch as she moved forward. The smell of damp earth surrounded her, and more than once, she had to push through cobwebs that clung to her face. The only light came from a small lantern Martha had given her, its flame casting eerie shadows on the earthen walls. After what seemed an eternity but was probably only minutes, Vanessa saw a faint glimmer of starlight ahead. She extinguished the lantern and moved more cautiously, aware that the exit might be watched. Emerging from the tunnel, Vanessa found herself in a small hollow near the creek, concealed from the main property by a stand of trees. As promised, a horse waited, tethered to a low branch and saddled for quick departure. The animal nickered softly as Vanessa approached. "SHH," she soothed, stroking its nose. "We need to be quiet now." Mounting as silently as possible, Vanessa oriented herself toward town. The night was clear, the stars providing enough light to see the main trail. But taking the trail would be too obvious. She needed to stay out of sight as much as possible. Gunfire continued to echo from the direction of the house as Vanessa guided the horse along the creek bed, moving slowly to avoid making noise. Once she was certain she was beyond the immediate vicinity of the ranch, she urged the horse into a canter, heading across country toward Watsonville. The ride was harrowing. Every shadow seemed to hide an attacker, every rustle in the brush a potential threat. Twice Vanessa had to dismount and lead the horse across difficult terrain, and once she froze in place for long minutes as riders passed on a parallel trail, their voices carrying clearly in the night air. "Thornton wants the woman alive," one man was saying. "Says he has plans for her." "What about Blackwell?" another voice asked. "Dead or alive, he doesn't care, but preferably dead." The casual discussion of Garrett's murder spurred Vanessa onward with renewed determination. She had to reach town, had to bring help before it was too late. The lights of Watsonville appeared in the distance just as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Vanessa pushed her tired mount into a final gallop, racing down the main street to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Matthews was awake, reviewing papers at his desk when Vanessa burst in. "Miss Lawson," he exclaimed, rising to his feet. "What in heaven's name? Silas Thornton and his men have attacked Garrett's ranch," Vanessa gasped, her voice hoarse from the cold night air. "They've been shooting for hours. Thomas tried to get help, but I think they caught him. You have to come quickly." The sheriff wasted no time with questions. He grabbed his gun, belt, and hat, shouting for his deputy as he strode toward the door. "How many men?" "At least 4 that we saw," Vanessa replied, following him outside. "Maybe more. Jim," the sheriff called to his deputy. "Rouse every able-bodied man in town. Blackwell's ranch is under attack. We ride in 10 minutes." Within the promised 10 minutes, a dozen men had gathered, armed and mounted. Vanessa insisted on accompanying them, despite the sheriff's objections. "I know the layout of the ranch," she argued, "and I can tend to any injured." "Stay back when we get there," the sheriff finally conceded. No heroics. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever, though they pushed their horses as fast as they dared in the growing light. As they crested the final hill, Vanessa's heart sank. Smoke was rising from the direction of the ranch house. "They've set fire to the place," one of the men muttered. "Spread out," the sheriff ordered. "Circle the property. Anyone who resists is to be considered armed and dangerous." The scene that greeted them as they rode into the ranch yard was chaotic. The barn was ablaze, flames leaping into the morning sky. Several bodies lay on the ground, men Vanessa didn't recognize, presumably Thornton's hired guns. Of Garrett, Frank, and Martha there was no immediate sign. "The house!" Vanessa cried, pointing to where figures were visible through the windows, still exchanging gunfire. The sheriff and his men approached cautiously, using outbuildings and wagons for cover. "Thornton!" the sheriff shouted. "This is Sheriff Matthews. You're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up." A shot answered him, splintering the wood near his head. "Have it your way," the sheriff muttered, signaling to his men to move in. What followed was a brief but intense gun battle. Thornton and his remaining men, caught between the sheriff's posse and Garrett's defensive position in the house, fought desperately but were quickly overwhelmed. When the shooting stopped, Vanessa ran toward the house, heedless of the sheriff's shout to stay back. "Garrett!" she called, bursting through the front door. "Garrett, where are you?" She found him in the kitchen, helping Frank tend to Martha, who had been grazed by a bullet but was otherwise unharmed. Garrett's face, streaked with soot and powder burns, lit up at the sight of her. "You made it," he said, rising to his feet and crossing to her in 3 long strides. "Thank God!" Vanessa fell into his embrace, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I was so afraid we wouldn't get back in time." "You did exactly what you needed to do," Garrett assured her, his good arm holding her tightly against him. "You saved us all." Outside, the sheriff and his men were securing the surviving attackers, including Silas Thornton, who had been wounded in the leg during the final exchange. "This is outrageous," Thornton was blustering as 2 deputies dragged him toward a wagon. "I'm a respected businessman. You have no right to treat me this way." "Save it for the judge, Thornton," the sheriff replied coldly. "We've got you for rustling, attempted murder, and about a dozen other charges. You'll be lucky to avoid the hangman's noose." Thornton's gaze fell on Vanessa, standing in the doorway of the house with Garrett's arm around her shoulders, his face contorted with rage. "This is your fault, you little—" "That's enough." One of the deputies cut him off, shoving him roughly into the wagon. The fire in the barn was brought under control before it could spread to the house or other buildings. Thomas had been found tied up in an old line shack, bruised but otherwise unharmed. The ranch had suffered damage, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. As the sheriff prepared to take Thornton and his surviving men back to town, he approached Garrett and Vanessa. "You'll need to come in tomorrow to give formal statements," he told them. "But from what I've seen, this was a clear case of self-defense on your part." "Thank you, Sheriff," Garrett said, shaking the man's hand, "for everything." "Thank your fiancée," the sheriff replied with a nod toward Vanessa. That was one brave ride she made. After the sheriff and his posse had departed with their prisoners, Garrett turned to Vanessa, his expression serious. "When I thought I might lose you," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I realized how empty my life would be without you. I don't want to wait until spring to marry you, Vanessa. Life's too uncertain, too precious. What are you suggesting? Vanessa asked, though her heart already knew the answer. Marry me at Christmas, Garrett said. Here at the ranch with our friends around us. Start the new year as husband and wife. Vanessa's answer was in her eyes before it reached her lips. Yes, she said simply. Christmas it is. The days that followed were busy with both preparation and recovery. The damage to the ranch was assessed and repairs begun. Silas Thornton and his men were held in the county jail, awaiting trial for multiple charges including rustling, attempted murder, and arson. Vanessa returned to her teaching duties, but each evening was spent at the ranch, helping with preparations for both Christmas and the wedding. The school term would end just before the holiday, giving Vanessa time to move her belongings to what would soon be her home. Word of the wedding spread quickly through Watsonville. Mrs. Hollister appointed herself unofficial wedding planner, coordinating food preparations with Martha and organizing decorations for the ranch house. The town's dressmaker worked tirelessly on a wedding gown for Vanessa, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with lace trim. 2 weeks before Christmas, Garrett was finally able to remove the sling from his arm. Though he still lacked full strength and mobility, the wound had healed cleanly, leaving only a scar as a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. A small price to pay, Garrett said when Vanessa's fingers traced the mark, for the life we're building together. On the last day of school before the Christmas break, Vanessa's students performed their carefully rehearsed pageant for the town. Parents and friends packed the schoolhouse, applauding enthusiastically as the children enacted the nativity story and sang carols in somewhat uncertain harmony. Garrett sat in the front row, his face alight with pride as he watched Vanessa guide her students through their performance. When it ended, he was the first on his feet, leading the standing ovation that left Vanessa blushing with pleasure. "You're a remarkable teacher," he told her as they walked back to Mrs. Hollister's afterward. "Those children adore you." "I love teaching them," Vanessa replied. "I'm grateful I can continue after we're married." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Garrett assured her. "Your work is important to the children, to the town, and to you." The following days passed in a blur of activity. Vanessa packed her few belongings, said goodbye to Mrs. Hollister, who would be a frequent visitor to the ranch. She assured Vanessa and made final preparations for the wedding. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening wonderland. The ranch house had been decorated with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. Reverend Thomas arrived early, bringing his wife to help with final preparations. Gradually, the invited guests began to arrive, townspeople who had become friends, neighboring ranchers and their families, and the students from Vanessa's school, their eyes wide with excitement at this unexpected addition to their Christmas festivities. As the appointed hour approached, Vanessa stood in the bedroom that had been Martha's domain until now but would soon be hers and Garrett's. Mrs. Hollister was helping her with the final adjustments to her wedding gown. "You look beautiful, my dear," the older woman said, her eyes misty. "Garrett is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Vanessa replied, thinking of how her life had changed since that dusty day on the road to Watsonville, when a stranger had stepped between her and a whip, offering protection and ultimately love. A knock at the door heralded Dr. Parker, who had agreed to escort Vanessa in the absence of her father. "It's time," he said simply. The main room of the ranch house had been transformed. The furniture had been moved to create an aisle leading to where Garrett stood beside Reverend Thomas, his face solemn but his eyes alight with love as Vanessa appeared in the doorway. She moved toward him, aware of the smiling faces on either side, but seeing only Garrett, the man who had saved her from Silas Thornton, who had opened his heart and his home to her, who had shown her what it meant to be truly cherished. The ceremony was simple and traditional, their voices clear and steady as they exchanged vows before God and their community. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett drew Vanessa into a tender kiss that promised a lifetime of love. The celebration that followed combined wedding festivities with Christmas traditions. A feast was served, presents were exchanged, and as evening fell, couples danced to music provided by local musicians. Through it all, Garrett kept Vanessa close, as if unable to believe his good fortune. As the night grew late and guests began to depart, Garrett led Vanessa onto the porch for a moment of quiet together. The snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. Stars glittered in the clear sky, and the only sound was the distant howl of a coyote in the hills. "Happy?" Garrett asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," Vanessa replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I never imagined when I came to Watsonville that I would find this kind of happiness." "Nor I," Garrett admitted. "I had resigned myself to solitude. You changed everything, Vanessa." "We changed each other," she corrected gently. "And we'll keep changing, growing together, building a life that neither of us could have created alone." Garrett turned her to face him, his expression serious in the starlight. "I make you this promise, Vanessa Blackwell. Your days of pain are truly done. From this day forward, I will dedicate my life to bringing you happiness." "And I make the same promise to you," Vanessa said, her hands framing his beloved face. "Whatever challenges come, we'll face them together." Their kiss, witnessed only by the winter stars, sealed a covenant born in a moment of courage on a dusty road and tempered by trials overcome together. As they returned to the warmth of their home, both knew that the greatest adventure of their lives was just beginning. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Vanessa sat in the same rocking chair where Garrett had recuperated from his gunshot wound, cradling their newborn son in her arms. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, the schoolhouse had expanded to accommodate more students, and Silas Thornton was serving a lengthy sentence in the territorial prison. Garrett knelt beside the chair, one hand gently stroking his son's downy head, the other clasping Vanessa's fingers. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Like his mother. He has your eyes," Vanessa observed, smiling at the tiny face that already showed hints of his father's strong features. Outside, carolers from town had gathered in the ranch yard, their voices rising in joyful harmony. Inside, the house was filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon, the glow of candlelight, and the profound peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. "Merry Christmas, my love," Garrett said, leaning in to kiss his wife. "Merry Christmas," Vanessa replied. "And many, many more to come." As their son stirred in her arms, making small, contented sounds, Vanessa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From terror to triumph, from loneliness to love, all because a cowboy had stepped between her and danger, declaring with quiet authority that her days of pain were done. And so they were.